Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Welcome back, everybody. I think many times, many of us have had that thought that we'd love to write a book. And sometimes it's a nonfiction book. Maybe it's based on your life or maybe your career. And then sometimes it's a fictional book. Today, we're going to focus on the fiction and how somebody births an idea and then decides whether that idea is strong enough, fiction, to be a book. I mean, imagine explaining your idea to somebody and seeing if it sticks. This whole concept. We're going to start from the concept to the publishing of fictional books. And he helps people with this all the time with his company, NFB Publishing. Mark Pogodzinski is back with us. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Good. How are you today?
I'm good. Yeah. This is, I think, a challenge for a lot of us because many of us are creative. We don't give ourselves credit for the creativity that we do have, but we're coming up with something out of nothing. This whole fictional idea that's going to be placed in a book. How do you know if the idea you have, the concept you have, is strong enough for a book? How do you decide?
That's a tough one to begin with because you have to believe in yourself first. Yeah. You have an idea. Maybe you've worked on it on and off for years, and fiction writers do that. They come back to it, life happens, and they lose it and they come back. The first part is believing that your idea has merit. It's always nice to get someone else's opinion, of course, but sometimes that's difficult to do. And a lot of writers that we work with are of the introvert mindset. And it's difficult to go out and ask someone like, hey, this is my idea. It's, off the wall, wild, and it's difficult. It's arduously tedious to explain your idea to someone who has no idea what you're talking about, and you want to get it across so passionately. How do they react to it? You talk to a friend or a family member, and they're like, "Whoa, you right?" And you made this up, and that's a difficult thing to do. So the first part is believing that your idea has merit. Like I have a concept. I've been working on it for a little while now. Maybe I have an outline. Maybe I've got a couple character sketches, but I think I have enough for a book. That's the first step. Your own belief in yourself. So that's where we start with a lot of our authors.
It can be challenging too who you ask about your concept, because if somebody's not into reading books, reading fiction, they're not going to be able to answer that question. So you got to be careful about the audience that you're testing the idea on. How does that begin? Somebody just has an idea for a book. Do all ideas have potential? Or coming from where you work, have you had people pitch an idea to you, and have you had to say, I don't know if that's workable for a book? Or basically any fictional idea can be turned into a book?
The quick answer would be yes. A positive answer, but some ideas take a lot more effort and they take a lot more development. And again, it can be time consuming. It can be annoying, frustrating, to the point where people want to give up on their fiction piece. And you see it in different types of media, like a good idea midway through a television show, and then all of a sudden it goes off the rails, and that might not have been a fully developed idea. And again, little techniques that we ask people: what's the ending of your book? Do you have an idea of how you want your book to end? Are you thinking multiple books, sequels? Do you want your characters to carry on? And once we start having those really, in terms of style, the style can come later, but those hard questions that we have to answer. Well, how does your book end? The protagonist is dead, or the protagonist survives, the antagonist is dead. And based on those, we can start crafting a plot line. A lot of people have beautiful ideas for characters, a beautiful scene, but that's not a book. That's one scene of a book. And, there's lots of examples out there of classic authors who start off this way. Hemingway would have journals of simple character sketches, but no plot. And I've read a couple of things about him, and like his editors, like, these are great characters, but they don't do anything. and he had a hard time coming up with like a plot line of action, of a conflict, rather than just two characters talking for 50, 60 pages about a meandering topic. And if you look at his short stories, I think those are a really good example of two characters are interesting, but not a lot is happening. One in particular is Hills Like White Elephants, about two characters talking about a possible abortion, but there's nothing else going on. And so his editor said, well, we need something in the background. And a couple authors, the same advice, beautiful dialogue, but there's nothing happening. So you have to keep your audience engaged. And as much as we want to be artistic geniuses, sometimes we have to go back and look at a scene or look at a chapter and think, okay, I get it because I created it, but someone else reading it, a new person, be like, they got to be bored out of their mind.
Do you think that the character development and the plot are equally as important?
For me personally, I prefer character development, and then the character will inform the plot. Okay, if I know my character, I know how they're going to react, then I can create a conflict for that character to test my character. And that's how I like to go about my writing personally. Everyone is different. Some people have fantastic plots, but their characters are cardboard. And you could read pages and like, I have no memory of this character. I know they're the main character, but I have no concept of them. And I'd rather hate a character than not remember a character. So again, it's different. I do character development first. I enjoy dialogue and then work my action into it. I've other authors. We have like one book that we published, Virgin Snow. It's set in Niagara Falls, Buffalo. The author had the concept of a scene and built the book out from that. And the characters were developed as the plot developed. So they started with a kernel of one scene and built a book around it. And it's a wonderfully written book. Has a lot of, although it's set in the past, it has a lot of social commentary for the present. So that's one example of it. A couple of other examples that we've worked with, people just had an image of a cover. And like, I got this image for a cover, and this cover is amazing. I don't have a story and or characters. All right, well, that's going to take longer to develop. But we like to think that there's nothing that we can eventually come to some idea about what you want to write about. And a lot of them are like crime fiction. Those are informed by real events. The Badge is another one that we have done where it was a concept of an idea. We created the cover and the person liked the cover. Like, this cover is really great. Now what? And then we had to start building out from that. So again, a kernel for me, characters, other people, scenes, and we build outwards. One person, they're an art history major, and they came up with a concept of being able to jump into pictures. No characters, no plot, just that. And then again, we build from that kernel of an idea. So I like to say that we can make a book out of anything, but again, it takes time, it takes effort, and we want to produce something that someone's going to want to read and not just simply be bored with. Boredom is the enemy.
Looking at Virgin Snow, interesting how it's set in the 1960s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
She felt that would give her characters more of a conflict, more tension, because you set characters, and again, it's a love story between two women. So there's a more tension because it's not readily accepted at that time. And we've done that with a couple other books. Tales from the Trenches was originally set in the modern times, but because of some of the dialogue and some of the plot devices, felt it better to set it in the 50s and 60s. And again, that hard-boiled feel to it. And then when the author started researching and we helping you look at 1950s, 60s Detroit, there's a lot more going on. There's a lot more tension. There's a lot more life, and you can draw from that for the book. And again, it's like a light bulb. Oh, I should set this in the past. I should set this in the future. And it really starts to inform. But again, that's where you run into the idea of how do I bounce these ideas off somebody? And we talked before, like an editor is essential for that, or someone who works in the business, a trusted friend who has an idea about art, creating a book. There's a lot of internet forums out there that will, say they'll read your book, and then you get back the most vanilla response. Like, I know they did not read the whole thing.
Right.
So, and again, one more disappointment when you're trying to create something.
Centering on, I'm randomly picking out one fictional book. You mentioned Virgin Snow. Do you recall during the writing process with the author, the changes or suggestions that you made along the way that they implemented?
Most of the changes were just character development. Again, we call them novice authors. The simple use of a descriptor on a dialogue. Character A screams, character A whispers, character A murmurs, informs that character. And again, we go back to writing 101, direct characterization versus indirect characterization. The audience wants to know the character, understand the character, neither love or hate the character. And creating characters that people hate is awesome. It's a lot of fun to do. You can bring out all the horrible things that you think about on a daily basis, but don't verbalize, and you can put that into the character. And so it gets a little release for you too, especially creating characters that you know that the audience is going to root against.
I'm connecting. I know we had a earlier conversation about comic strips, and I wanted to be a syndicated cartoonist, created a comic strip that almost became syndicated when I was in my early 20s. And I remember trying to develop the characters, and they were all based on people I knew. And even one of them in this group of, call them adolescents, right? The qualities of this one, he probably, high school student, that was a teacher. All the qualities in him, that was one of my teachers. And I translated that into a student. It's funny where the ideas come from. Do you find that many fictional books, a lot of the properties of the characters come from people that the author knows or was associated with?
Like, based on your example, you can't help but do that. And it's a good thing too. I always like to think that in any character that I create, there's at least some aspect of me, whether it's a good aspect or a bad aspect. And that helps me write the character in, I think, a realistic and a vibrant manner. And there's nothing wrong with that. And again, we go back to Hemingway. He had notebooks upon notebooks of simple observations of the way people walked, accents, the way they carried themselves. Right. And a good fiction writer has to be a good observer of people. I always tell the story, and when we go out to dinner with my wife, not that she is not a brilliant conversationalist, but I will eavesdrop from time to time. I listen to the way people talk, what they're talking about, and put it in the back of my mind, and maybe I can use that, the way someone holds a fork or like stabs at their meal. And again, fiction writers have to be that. They got to observe the world around them. And again, a lot of them don't partake in it because of like just the idea of the introvert, but we're watching the way people cock their head to one side, the way they speak, the way they carry themselves. I'm a big fan of accents. I live in Western New York, and unfortunately we have one of the worst, the Appalachian A, and that you try to write that in your fiction, it brings the character alive. And so observation is a key when you're creating characters, and you're basing on your past, someone you like, a boss. There's an old writer's technique. You take your person you hate the most in the world, rearrange the letters in their name, and you got yourself a villain. So again, a little technique, an inside joke for you as the author, but you see that person because you know what they're like, and that they become the character.
You need to know your character. What better way to know the character if it's somebody you know? Yeah. And
then you can take them to the extreme. They were like a terrible person, and then what else would they have done had they been given the opportunity? And then you got a villain, and then the hero's based maybe on a heroic person or an aspect of yourself, a parent that you looked up to, and then in your head you see this person, and then you can start describing them, and that person becomes alive on a page, and it's quite brilliant if it's done correctly.
As an author, and totally hear what you're saying in terms of observing people, do you almost feel like you're an FBI profiler.
Oh, yeah, again, you're watching the way people speak. And again, I minored in psychology. So I always tell people you can never have a normal conversation with anyone anymore because you were taught to read so much into the way body movements, the way they hold their hands. Do they adjust themselves? If you ask them a question, do they look away? And it's great and annoying at the same time. But I think that helps me as a writer. The observation, paying keen attention to detail, even someone's clothing. I remember writing a story about a man who tied a full Windsor tie because he rejected the half Windsor because it was a half measure. And that's based on someone I knew. Like they always had the full Windsor tie. And it was just something I remember and something I observed. And they took their time tying their tie. So that informed that character. And then, ideally, it's fun for you as the author or as the cartoonist, you writing or drawing this character, you're like, haha, in my mind, I can see where this person originated.
It seems like it can be very exciting when you can breathe life into this non-existing entity and you can make it do whatever you want it to. Yeah. God, it's almost a feeling of weird power that you have. You know what I mean?
And then again, the great thing is you've created something that's going to outlive you. Like, not to be insulting, but if you go to like Chicago and go, hey, do you know Steve or you know Mark? People are going to be like, who are you talking about? I don't know those people. You know Superman. Automatically, there's an image in their head. There's the way he looks, the way he moves, the way he speaks. And so in a sense, that character is more alive than you and I because he's more well known and he will far outlive us. Hopefully not, but maybe. So creating that, like making that, how fantastic is that concept? Is that moment when you create something that's going to outlive you? That more people know a fictional person than they know a real person, and that would be the goal of any author.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. Even watching
isn't it?
TV or movie, a fictional show, that you feel like you know them as if they're a real person. But, Superman's not real. Spider-Man's not real. But have somebody list the qualities of each of them. Laser tight. You can do it. And they've been around for decades, many decades, those characters. Let's pick another book, another fiction book, and kind of dissect it. Which one?
One of my favorite ones that we ever did was A Shadow of Forever, which was a really interesting concept about Norse Vikings coming across the Atlantic and coming up the St. Lawrence Seaway to meet Native American tribes in Western New York. And the image we had was the longship at the base of Niagara Falls. And the book is incredibly detailed. He did a lot of research on weapons, vernacular, everything. And those characters come alive. Totally don't exist, never will exist. There's no evidence that it ever happened. But when you read that book, it seems so logical that this could have happened and that these people would have existed. And this is how they would have interacted. And I think that's a great example of character creation, of world building at its finest. That I can say realistic fiction, although it's borderline at best, but it could have happened. And when you read it, you see these people based on like an education of a Viking, what they would look like, what they would sound like, how they would fight, how they would interact with the Native American tribes in the area. So I thought that was quite brilliant the way they went about it. And again, a little bit thicker book because the world building took time. It's creating a clan, naming them, going through everybody and introducing them without saying boring, and then creating elements of a tribe in Western New York. So again, the idea behind that is just, I think, fantastic.
That seems to me like a lot of work because you need to do the research. It is like how did you present it? Fictional, real fiction.
Realistic fiction, but not.
Yeah. Yeah, but a lot of it, the characters are based on real situations. The tools they use, the weapons they use, could be the boat they used. That existed. The characters did not.
Yeah, and you can go back and look at nonfiction references There's a passage in it about the creaking of the boards of the longship as it crosses the Atlantic. Um, just like little details like that really brings that image to mind. And then you could go like completely different. We did Chased by Thunder, which is part of a series, mystery series. The mysteries themselves, the plots are based on actual crimes that were committed here in Buffalo, but the characters themselves, their interactions, are all fictional. So you have one which is completely made up, and then another one which is like really rooted in reality, but yet still fiction. It's two different types of writing depending on the author's like what they want to get out. And then science fiction is a completely new thing where you just make stuff up, world building at its finest, but you can also root that in realistic, cutting edge science.
Unless it was completely off the wall, I would feel a responsibility to make sure there was some accuracy in what's going on. Like, for example, let's say you write a book about mobs in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. I would have to make sure that it was accurate to the timepiece, which just is more of a challenge. It's more of a, I guess, a restriction. But I'm thinking like almost any fictional book is going to be based on a certain time, and there's going to be certain facts that surround it. I'm trying to think of a concept that wouldn't exist. I don't know if there is one.
There's a great philosophical question. Imagine a color that doesn't exist, and it's impossible to do it because they're all whatever you imagine is made up of colors that exist.
Right.
So fiction is the same way. I think we mentioned like Dennis Lehane once. I went to see him speak, and he said, "There's nothing new. I don't do anything new with my fiction because there are only so many stories that I can write. We just write variations of the same story, whatever it may be." And I think that's true and false at the same time. You can come up with a new concept based on an established plot line, and that becomes something new, and that will inspire others. But it's again, you want to have your fiction rooted in whatever reality you've created. There's another book that we did called Come the Thief in the Night, which is the concept was that geneticists get a hold of the Shroud of Turin and want to clone Jesus. To like again, totally wild, interesting plot line, but within the concept of that science, it made sense for the book. So the ideas should be wild and varied, but for the author, they should make sense within the confines of your plot.
But even that concept, there are documented biblical facts that you would have to adhere to. And then I was just thinking in my mind, what is that, a fictional book about some intergalactical situation where you make up the spaceships, whatever. But guess what? There's a thing called gravity. There's many principles that you would need to adhere to. So to your point, nothing's new. I can't think of a fictional situation where it's not connected to something that is real. Interesting.
As a kid, I loved Dune. I read those books when I was younger. And again, they have to adhere to the rules set up by the author within the confines of it. Like the spice and the worms and the different factions. They had to make sense within the confines. And I think that's part of the joy of writing is that you come up with this stuff, but in this whatever fictional world I'm making, my rules will make sense to my characters and ideally to my readers.
I guess in a way, it gives you a baseline because if you didn't have those boundaries, even if it's an intergalactical expedition, the boundaries are gravity, the principles of that. I'm just very hypothetical here, but there's something to work with. I guess sometimes it's a good thing. We're out of time. Yeah, fascinating talk today about this. Got to tell you, Mark.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, very interesting. NFB Publishing, best way for somebody to find you?
Just go to the website. There's a small form to fill out. And again, concept, image, character, we can build from the smallest of seeds.
Got to be very honest with you. I've talked to publishers before, smaller company publishers like yourself, nothing close to what you do in terms of the attention to detail and the personalized attention you give to every author. You make it seem, and it's reality, that everybody is important. You have a concept, I'm going to work with you. We're going to flesh it out. We're going to create a book from start to finish, right to the cover. Very cool. So great having you on today.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too. We'll be right back. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education
And to finish what I started to get my diploma.
just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.